Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, who's the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Welcome again to our show, Daniel.
Thank you.
Well, good. There's a lot of activity going on right now in Washington, a lot of talk and a lot of politicking going on dealing with fast track, the Pacific Free Trade Agreement, so to speak. And this is not brand new for Washington. I went through these arguments very often. There's all kinds of factions who endorse one side or the other. For instance, I put myself in the free trade faction, but that was the smallest faction. There weren't many real, true free traders there. But there were fake free traders, which is what you hear from most Republicans. They're saying, oh, we're for fast track, and we want to lower the tariffs, and this is going to be wonderful. But I don't think that's their ulterior motives, even though on occasion, you know, some tariffs are lower, but there's much more to it than that. Then you have the populist streak, and they just like protectionism, and they think that if you had total protectionism, you'd protect jobs and this sort of thing, which isn't quite true. But then there are some internationalists. They don't take sort of a moral principle or an economic principle as much as a power principle. Anything that promotes internationalism, you take a look at what has happened. I remember when the WTO was passed, they said the third leg of the New World Order was in place. First we had the IMF and the World Bank, and now we had the WTO, and this is part of that WTO sentiment. It's, to me, worldwide management. But these negotiations have been going on for a long time. But they're getting climactic right now, and that there's going to be votes soon in the Senate, and this is stirring up a lot of interest. Have you followed a little bit about what these negotiations have been like? What's going on there? Do we get to know what they're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. The debate about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You know, a lot of people have complained that this is an absolutely secret process, that we can't even know what's in the bill. You know, even with NAFTA and CAFTA, we were able to look at the legislation beforehand in your office. We looked through it. I was looking at an article today, Representative Tim Ryan is complaining that when he wants to look at anything in the bill, he has to go to a secure facility in Congress. He's not allowed to bring any staffer in, and if he dares write a note, he's got to leave it there behind him. So,
and what was our president's position on open government when he was a candidate?
You know, transparency.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like it to me.
But isn't this, as I read, in the fast tracking, this kind of practice will be the norm in the future? Well,
that's the direction we've been going. In any way, you know, domestically now it's international secrecy, and we never know what's going on. You know, it involves foreign policy as well, and this is mixed in with foreign policy. It's mixed in with monetary policy. But you know, there's a couple words in one sentence in this agreement that the Congress will have to vote on, up or down. And I think it tells you a lot about what's going on. I just want to read these couple words. It says, the reports submitted to Congress by the President may be classified to the extent the President determines appropriate. So here he's going to do this and send it back to the Congress and classify some materials, and nobody's going to know what's in it. But you know, the other thing that is rather amazing, and I'm sure you have noticed this, is, you know, it hasn't been too long ago we were talking about an agreement that the President was drawing up with Iran, you know, it was, and the President wanted to just run it, sign up, and do it, which technically he was wrong. The Congress has a responsibility to review this. So the Congress and the Republicans are yelling and screaming, no, you can't do this, we want to review it. And I said, they do have this authority to review it, but is that their motivation? Are they the champions of the Constitution, that's why they want to review it? I question their integrity. But all of a sudden, those individuals who were screaming and hollering for a review of this agreement, they're the champions of this piece of legislation. Are you surprised at all?
Yeah, situational ethics, I guess.
That is for sure. But you know, a lot of people have this argument that free trade is very, very dangerous. And I think, and they want to talk about trade balances and balance of payments, but you know, I think the freest situation on trade, one of the best, would have been in our early history in the United States. and we had an interstate commerce clause which prohibited restrictions on trade. And so nobody kept track, and still nobody keeps track of the balance of payments between Texas and New York as if it were important. And people could move about and go back and forth and trade. If one state was abusive, they'd move back. But right now, we don't even have that in this country. So I'm very fearful of this, and I just think that this is most likely going to pass by Republicans, the champions of freedom. I also see this in the light of defining Keynesianism. You know, we talk about military Keynesianism for the Republicans, and we talk about welfare Keynesianism from the Democrats. But this is trade Keynesianism. It's not free trade. It's managed trade, and there's all kinds of things that could happen from that.
You've always argued the case for real free trade, which is a completely different view from the ones you outlined, the other three that you outlined. But how could you go about convincing someone who's skeptical and worried about jobs or something? How would you convince them that this actually does help the economy?
With difficulty. I'm convinced of it, and I think on the long term this is exactly true. But they see in the narrow sense that jobs are going overseas, and if we just would prohibit that. But if you don't trade, they don't have any of our dollars, and they won't spend it back here. I mean, it shouldn't be complicated. But when an economy is in trouble, and you suggest, oh well, let's open up the trade barriers, they see this as a disadvantage, and they don't want to do it. But it is something that would really be helpful. What the argument is saying is that we can't have free trade because we have a weak economy and it'll make it weaker. But we don't have a weak economy because we've had free trade. I mean, we have free trade with Canada, one of the best maximum trade back and forth, and nobody blames that trade on unemployment in either place. So it's not the lack of free trade. It's not because we have too much free trade, yet they want to inhibit the free trade and think that's going to help. We have a weak economy because you know what, and that is the Federal Reserve creates the business cycle. There's too much taxes and too much regulations, and you don't correct that by taking away the freedom of American business people to move their capital and move resources. And this whole thing, just like on the drug issue, I don't argue for the legalization of marijuana. I argue the case for legalization of freedom of choice to make your own decisions about risk. And the trade issue ought to be a freedom issue. If a businessman or an individual has earned money, that money should be his, and he should be able to spend it as he sees fit. So if one of our car industries, which has happened in the past, goes downhill and they're not doing well, people say, well, let's keep the better cars out, and that'll help our car industry. They tried that and didn't work. But the individual had the right to buy the better car. He actually indirectly, but it takes longer, and people don't see this. So, oh my goodness, we're an American car company, and we're not selling anything. What are we doing wrong? And so they have to shift gears. So the pressure is put on them to improve the product. The most interesting thing to me that I learned in Austrian economics is that the consumer's pretty important. Like, the consumer is king. And yet we have factions now. Matter of fact, it involves this trade agreement because some people some of the populists and the liberals will go along with that as long as these trade agreements regulate labor law and environmental law. So if we have these trade agreements, it just seems like we shouldn't have to give up anything. We should be able to defend our right to buy a good product, and that will emphasize it. Most everything can be solved, as far as I'm concerned, going back to the principles of liberty and making the individuals with the restrictions that people can't lie, cheat, steal, and harm people.
I was reading the other day that I think this number is right, that the U.S. is the 24th in place on how easy it is to open a business. So we're way down number 24. That has to be a factor. And I remember once I was at an ethnic festival on the Mall in D.C., and they were making some delicious food to demonstrate their culture. And we wanted to buy some because it looked great. And they said, I'm sorry, we're not allowed to sell it. It's against the regulations. So they just had to throw it away.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's foolish. And remember in the Depression, they said we need prices of commodities to go up so let's plow the fields under while people were starving. That was the introduction of Keynesianism, you know. So now people should have more confidence in freedom, and a lot of people do, but they wouldn't understand the intricacies and the short-term arguments that, well, you're going to hurt business people, and if we do this, there's going to be a loss of jobs. But if there's freedom of movement and freedom of salaries to go up and down and freedom of prices to go up and down, the consumer votes labor costs and they vote products. Consumers put people out of business. Does this businessman want to be put out of business? He wants protected. He wants bailed out. Do labor unions and people who are just entering the workforce want to work for $8 an hour? No, they want to work for $12 an hour. So if you can coerce them into doing it, so there's always this shortcut. But if people say, well, why should consumers be important? Well, it just happens that way in a free market. But it also happens that we're all consumers. We're not all laborers, and we're not all business people. And yet all this management, the people who really love it are the nanny state people. You know, they love this, whether it's social engineering or whether it's economic engineering. They just love this stuff. And you subsidize it, and you get too many of them. That's why we have hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats running around and telling us what to do. But guess what? I vote for free trade, and I don't want to give any more power to the president. And if we don't want him to, have power to declare war without congressional approval, we should not allow him to do this and then classify the information. And as you pointed out, we can't even find out what they're doing in these negotiations, even if we wanted to.
Could Congress do if they really wanted free trade? What would it look like if they?
Well, it wouldn't be that complicated because we did. It should be unilateral. The Constitution says the executive branch can't do it. Besides, that transfer is illegal, whether it's to the executive branch or to an international body. And the Congress could just pass a law. I mean, they wanted to do, it would be best to deal bilaterally. So if Congress wanted to set tariffs between United States and Canada, they could. And it might be less than perfect, but they have the authority. And they'd have to pass a law, the Senate would have to agree, and the president would have to sign it. But it wouldn't be this secret stuff, and internationalism, NAFTA and CAFTA and WTO, and everything. I mean, the New World Order is here, and everything that promotes the New World Order is done at the expense of liberty, and that is why we're in deep trouble right now, and people have to think about liberty over the short-term economic benefits of a bailout. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.